The crowd was loud, voices screamed, metal clanged, and lights flashed across the giant alien arena. Thousands of creatures sat in the stands, waiting for blood. They had come to see a fight, one more week being thrown into the monster pit. High above them, behind glass walls, sat nobles and generals, watching with interest. One of them was a young alien girl named Zora. She was calm, quiet, unlike the others. But even she looked toward the cage with curiosity. A voice echoed through the speakers, and now, from a forgotten planet called Earth, the human gate opened, and a man walked out. No armor, no weapons. Just chains around his wrists and a tired look on his face. His name was Cade, and he looked nothing like a warrior. The crowd laughed. Zora tilted her head. Confused, he didn't seem afraid. He walked slowly, eyes scanning the arena. Calm and silent. From the other side, another gate opened. A deep roar shook the floor. The creature that stepped out was huge, 10 feet tall, covered in bone armor, 6 red eyes glowing. With rage, it was a war beast, known as a Gorok. A monster that killed everything it was ordered to fight. The crowd roared again, leaned forward in her seat, whispering to herself, "He'll be eaten alive." The guards backed away, and the gates closed. Now it was just the man and the monster. The Gorok stomped forward, growling, sharp claws ready to tear flesh. Cade didn't move. He just stood there, breathing slow. Then he did something strange. He raised his hand, open palm, and said something quietly. A word no one understood, but the moment he spoke, everything changed. The Gorak froze. It stopped moving. Its head tilted to the side. It stared at Cade with all 6 eyes. Then, slowly, it dropped to one knee and bowed. The arena went silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Zora's eyes widened, heart racing. What did I just see? She whispered. The loudspeaker crackled, confused. The match is delayed. The guards rushed in, weapons ready, unsure what was happening. The monster didn't fight. It kept its head down, as if it was waiting for an order, but not from the F. Guards from the human Cade looked at the creature. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just whispered again, "Thank you." Then he raised his hands, letting the guards chain him again without a fight. Later, deep in the prison cells below the arena, Cade sat alone. His arms were bruised, his clothes torn, but his face was calm. Across the metal bars, guards whispered about him. He said something. The Gorak bowed. Is he a weapon? In the upper halls, Zora paced back and forth. Her mind raced with questions. She had seen many battles. She had seen monsters tear creatures in half without blinking, but never this, never respect. She waited until the guards changed shifts. Then she made her way down into the prison cells alone. When she reached his door, Cade looked up. He wasn't surprised to see her. "You're not a guard," he said quietly. Zora stepped closer, but not too close. "No," she said. "I watched you in the arena. I saw the Gorak bow." Cade nodded once. Zora stared at him. "You spoke to it," she said. "What language was that?" Cade didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't know. I just felt it." Zora frowned. "You expect me to believe that?" Cade looked her in the eyes. "I'm not here to impress you," he said. "I didn't choose to be." Hear it all, Zora felt a strange chill. There was no anger in his voice, just truth, real, heavy truth. She sat down on the stone floor across from his cell. "What did you feel when you saw the Gorak?" she asked. Cade took a breath. "I saw pain," he said. "Not rage, not hunger, pain." Zora blinked. "You pitied it." "No," he said. "I respected it, and it saw that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere above, another crowd cheered for another fight. Zora stood up. "Tomorrow, they'll send another creature," she said. "Bigger, worse." Cade shrugged. Then I'll speak again. She looked at him for one long moment, then turned and walked. Away back in the control room, high above the arena. A general watched the recordings. He rewound the footage of the monster bowing. Paused it, zoomed in, then turned to his advisors. No monster has ever done this, he said. Not in all our records, one of the advisors whispered. It obeyed an old word, a forbidden one. The general stared at the screen. Find out who he is, he said, and where he learned that word. Before it's too late, in the dark cell, Cade sat alone, but not afraid. He looked down at his palm, the one he had raised in the arena. A strange symbol had appeared, faint, glowing like fire under his skin. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt something growing inside him. And for the first time in his life, he was not afraid of the monsters, because maybe he was something more than human. Zora could not sleep that night. The image of the Gorak bowing to the human played in her mind again and again. She had watched hundreds of fights in the arena. She had seen blood, fire, screams, but never silence, never respect. The human didn't act like a fighter. He acted like a leader, or something older the next morning. Zora returned to the prison chamber. She walked down the cold hallway where the air smelled like dust and fear. The guards gave her space. They had heard the stories. One of them whispered, "The human speaks to monsters." Another said, "He didn't scream. He didn't run." Zora ignored them. She stopped in front of the cell. Cade was awake, sitting against the wall, staring at the ceiling. He didn't speak first. He didn't need to. Zora broke the silence. "I asked the records keeper about the word you said yesterday," she began. "It's not in our language, but it's close to something ancient." Cade looked at her. "Waiting, an old command," she said. "Used by the first ones to control the war beasts." Cade raised an eyebrow. "You think I used a command word?" Zora crossed her arms. "You didn't just speak it, you felt it." Cade looked down at his palm. That strange glowing mark was still there, faint but real. "I don't know how I did it," he said, but the monster understood. Zora stepped closer to the bars. "If you can do it again, the masters will panic. They built this empire by turning those beasts into slaves. If one human can wake their memory, they'll fear you more than any army." Cade stood up slowly. He walked closer to the bars. His eyes locked on hers. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "You could be watching from a safe seat up there." Zora hesitated. Then she said, "Because I saw something in your eyes. Not anger, not weakness. Something I thought was lost." Cade waited. She whispered, "Honor." That afternoon, a new match was announced. The crowd was louder than before. Word had spread across the city. A human had survived the Gorak. Now, they wanted blood. They wanted proof the system still worked. Cade was taken from his cell and walked down the long tunnel again. This time, there were more guards. Weapons ready. They feared him now, even if they didn't understand why. In the stands, Zora sat with the other nobles. A high general leaned close to her. "He won't walk away this time," the general said with a smirk. "We're sending in a twin-headed bracker." Zora didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the arena floor. The gates opened. Cade stepped into the light, chains still on his arms. He looked calm, focused. From the far gate, the bracker stormed in. 2 heads, 4 arms, scales as thick as armor. It roared and slammed the ground with its fists. The crowd screamed with joy. But Cade didn't move. He stepped forward, raised one hand, and spoke again. Not the same word as before. This time it was deeper, longer, more ancient. The bracker stopped mid-charge. Both heads stared at him. The arena fell silent again. The creature let out a strange sound, not a roar, but a low growl that sounded like pain. Then it lowered all 4 arms and stepped back. It did not bow, but it did not attack. It hesitated and that was enough. The guards rushed in, shouting. They fired stun rounds at the creature, trying to trigger its rage. The Bracker screamed and struck the walls instead of Cade. Chaos followed. Zora left the stands and rushed to the prison floor. She found Cade being dragged back to his cell. His clothes torn, his face bruised, but his eyes still steady. Later, said she stood outside his cell again. "You did it again," she said. Cade wiped blood from his lip. "I didn't control it," he said. "I spoke to it, I think." It remembered something. Zura nodded slowly. "It's not just the words," she said. "It's your blood. Our history speaks of humans who once ruled this galaxy. They had the power to speak with monsters. Not to command them, but to connect with them." Cade laughed, a tired sound. "You think I'm a king?" Zura shook her head. "No," she said. "But maybe you're the last one who carries their fire." Cade looked away. "I was just an engineer back on Earth." He said, "I fixed engines, not monsters." Zora smiled faintly. "Then maybe the galaxy sent the right kind of leader elsewhere in the city, behind locked doors." The masters met in secret. They played the arena footage on repeat. They saw the Bracker stop. They saw fear grow in the eyes of the crowd. "He's dangerous." One said he must be removed. "Not yet," said another. "If he controls the beasts, we must learn how." A final voice spoke in the dark room. Calm and cold. "Bring in the true monster." Back in the prison, Cade sat quietly in the dark. Zura had left. But her words stayed with him. A king. A voice. Of the past, he didn't believe it. Not yet. But somewhere deep inside, something was waking up. A memory that wasn't his. A fire that had waited too long. And the monsters, they remembered too. The air in the prison was heavy. Cade sat in his dark cell, staring at his open hand. The strange glowing mark was still there. Faint but alive. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know why monsters listened to him. But deep inside, something told him this was only the beginning. The next day came with tension. The arena was full again. The crowd louder than ever before. Whispers had spread across the city. The human speaks to monsters. The beasts obey him. Some cheered to see him fall. Others came because they were afraid he might not, in her private box above the arena. Zora sat alone. She kept her eyes on the floor. She had learned more about the old stories since yesterday. The prime tongue, the language of rulers from thousands of years ago. Only a few creatures even remembered it. Only one bloodline ever spoke it without being taught. And now, a simple human from a dead planet had spoken it twice. Zora didn't know what scared her more, that he could do it, or that he didn't even know how. Below, in the tunnel, Cade stood ready. His wrists were unchained now, not out of kindness, but because the guards didn't want to touch him anymore. He was no longer a prisoner. He was a threat. A guard approached him. "You fight the Korak next," the guard said, not hiding his fear. Cade didn't reply. The Korak was a monster out of nightmares, twice the size of the Gorak, covered in thick black skin, horns like blades, and eyes that could burn through metal. It was kept in a special chamber. Away from all others, it had never been defeated, never been tamed. The gates opened. Cade stepped into the sunlight. The crowd stood to their feet. The cheering was mixed with fear now, across the arena. The second gate began to open. Smoke rolled out. First, then came the Korak. Its body filled the gate, every step shaking the ground. It roared, deep, loud, full of fury. Even the guards at the edges stepped back. But Cade stood still. He didn't speak right away. He looked into the creature's burning eyes. The Korak stopped, sniffed the air, then lowered its head. Cade raised one hand slowly and said something, a word with power, deep and full of meaning. The crowd went silent. The Korak blinked its red eyes. Then, to everyone's shock, it knelt, not out of fear, but like a soldier before a king. Gasps filled the arena. One voice from the stands shouted, "He commands the monsters." Another screamed, "It's the return of the old blood." Zora stood up, unable to believe what she was seeing. The Korak let out a low sound. It placed one claw on the ground, then spoke only one word, in a voice full of pain and memory. "Servant, guards." Rushed into the arena, panic on their faces. They pointed guns at the beast, at Cade. But the Korak turned and roared. A wall of sound knocked the guards down. Cade stepped forward and placed his hand on the monster's head. It growled softly, then sat beside him like a dog waiting for orders. Up in the command tower, the masters shouted over each other. "He's waking them. He must be destroyed. He is the key." One old master leaned forward and whispered, "No. He is the return." Back in his cell, Cade sat with quiet eyes. The Korak was taken back into its chamber peacefully. No fight, no blood, just silence. Zura visited him again that evening. She looked at him through the bars, no longer guarded, no longer proud. "Do you know what you are?" she asked. Cade shook his head. "I'm just a human," he said. "From a mining colony?" "No," she whispered. "You are something we forgot." A voice from the past. She told him the full story. Thousands of years ago, before the current empires, humans ruled many worlds. They didn't rule with fear, but with unity. They created the prime tongue, a language of peace and power. The great beasts were not pets or enemies. They were protectors. They made an oath to the human kings. "We serve the voice that speaks from the heart." But then came the Silence War. The language was banned. The humans fell, and the monsters were turned into tools of war, forgotten, enslaved. Now, Cade had spoken the lost words again. Not from training, but from instinct. Zura looked him in the eyes. "You may not believe in kings," she said, "but the monsters do." Cade stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They bow because they remember something I don't. They see it in me." Zora nodded, "And so do I." In the deepest parts of the prison, the Korak growled in its sleep and whispered in the old tongue. "The fire has returned. Far away, in the stars, old machines began to wake. Old codes unlocked. Systems that had been dead for centuries blinked once again. The voice of the human had touched more than the monsters. It had touched the core of the galaxy itself. Something was coming. And the monsters, they were ready to rise again. Deep inside the royal library, Zura walked between tall, dusty shelves. Books and scrolls floated in the air, glowing with light from long-dead stars. This place was not open to the public. Only nobles and scholars could enter, and even they feared. The oldest parts of it, Zura wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she had to find it. Something about the human was too strange, too familiar, too dangerous. She reached a sealed chamber at the end of the hall. A silver gate blocked the door. She pressed her palm to the sensor. The gate scanned her blood, then opened with a deep, slow sound inside. The room was round and quiet. Floating in the center was an old data crystal. She reached out and touched it. The crystal glowed and began to speak. Archive entry. The old blood in the time before empires. Before monsters were weapons, there was unity. The humans led the Great Alliance. They did not rule with force, but with the prime tongue, a language that reached the soul. The monsters of war became protectors. Their leaders swore an oath to the human bloodline. Zora's heart raced. The crystal continued. But the Silence War broke everything. The humans were hunted. Their blood was erased. From the records, only one family survived, hidden, waiting until the prime tongue returned. Zura stepped back, her hands shaking. Could Cade be from that family? A forgotten child of the rulers. She didn't know, but the signs were there, the way the monsters bowed. The way he spoke the words without knowing their meaning. And the glowing mark on his palm, it was all in the ancient records. That evening, she returned to the prison tunnels. Cade was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor. He looked up when she entered. "I found something," she said, serious now. He waited silently. She sat across from him. "Between the bars, there was once a human bloodline," she said. "With the power to speak the prime tongue, the monsters followed them, not out of fear, but respect. They called them the heart voice." Cade raised an eyebrow. "Heart voice," he repeated. Zura nodded because they spoke not just with sound. She said, but with truth. Cade looked down at his hand. The mark had grown brighter, shaped like a flame or a star. "I never knew my family," he said. "I grew up in a small colony, no history, no roots." Zura stared at him. "Maybe your blood remembers even if your mind does not." Cade didn't answer right away. Then he asked, "Why tell me this?" Zura replied, "Because I believe the Empire will try to kill you soon. They fear what you might become." Up in the high towers, the council gathered. They watched the arena footage again. Monsters bowing, beasts stepping back instead of attacking. One elder leaned forward and whispered, "He is the return of the old blood. We must destroy him before the oath spreads." The next day, Cade was not taken to the arena. Instead, he was brought to a white room with no guards. Just one tall alien in gold armor sat waiting. His name was Varric, the supreme commander of the city's defense forces. He studied Cade in silence for a moment, then spoke. "You're not like the others," he said. "No," Cade answered. Varric walked closer. Slowly. "You don't look like a king," he said. Cade looked up. "I'm not one." Varric narrowed his eyes. "But you carry the fire." Cade stood. "I never asked for it," he said. "But if it means the monsters will be free again, I'll carry it." Varric laughed softly. "Bold words. Then let's test them." He pressed a button on the wall. The floor split open. And from the ground rose a creature that made even the Korak look small. It had black wings, red eyes, and horns like blades. The room shook with its breath. It growled and stepped toward Cade. Varric watched, waiting for fear. Cade didn't move. He took one slow breath, then stepped forward. The creature snarled. Cade raised his hand and whispered the prime tongue. The same word he spoke to the Gorak, but deeper now. Stronger. The creature blinked, then bowed its head so low it touched the ground. Varric stood in silence. He couldn't hide his shock. Cade turned to him. "I don't need your throne," he said, "but I won't be your tool either." Varric stared at him, speechless, that night. The towers glowed with warning lights. The monsters across the Empire were waking up. They could feel the words in the wind, the fire in the blood. They remembered their old oaths. Not to cities, not to empires, but to one voice. The heart voice. Zura stood at her balcony, watching the skies. The stars looked brighter than before, and somewhere down below, Cade walked free now. Not as a prisoner, but as something new. Something forgotten by time, but never by the monsters. The old blood had returned, and the Empire was not ready. The city slept under a dark sky. Lights blinked across towers, and flying ships moved silently in the night. But below the surface, something was changing. Something old was waking up in the deepest cells of the monster pits. The creatures whispered. To each other, they did not speak in words. They used sound, breath, and memory. They passed one message across all cages. The heart voice has returned. Cade stood in the old tunnel under the arena. No guards followed him now. No chains, no orders. He was free, but he wasn't leaving yet. He had a promise to keep, to the monsters, to Zura. And to the fire burning in his blood. Zura met him in the shadowed chamber, where they used to speak through bars. Now there were none. She handed him a small device, a signal emitter. "If you press this," she said, "it will reach the monster pits. They will hear you, all of them." Cade took it and looked her in the eyes. "You believe this will work?" Zura nodded. "They are ready," she said. "You woke something older than fear. They remember who you are." Far above, in the control tower, alarms began to blink red. Guards looked at each other in confusion. Systems were failing, monster. Cells were unlocking. Control chips were going offline. The commander yelled, "Shut it all down." But it was too late. The cages were empty now, not from a break, but because the beasts were walking out on their own. Cade stepped into the center of the arena once more. This time, no gates opened for battle. No crowd cheered. The arena was quiet, but then, one by one, monsters began entering through the tunnels. Not to fight, but to gather. Gorak, Korak, Bracker, even smaller species with wings and claws. They all stood around him, watching, waiting. Cade raised the signal device, but he didn't use it. He dropped it gently to the ground. "I don't need this," he said. "I will speak with my voice." He stepped forward and raised his hand. "My name is Cade," he said, loud and clear. "I come from a forgotten place, with no crown, no army, and no title. But I carry the fire in my blood, and I remember you. You are not weapons. You are not slaves. You are protectors. And today, we rise together." The monsters let out a low sound, not a roar, but a deep hum of agreement, like thunder building inside the earth. Zura watched from above, her heart racing. The sound was ancient, the oath of old. Suddenly, armed guards stormed the arena. They opened fire, but the monsters did not panic. They moved in front of Cade, forming a shield of living armor. No bullet touched him. Then the Gorak charged. One strike from its claw knocked the tower wall down. The uprising had begun, across the city. Monsters escaped labs and cages. They didn't attack the people. They only fought the soldiers who tried to stop them. Citizens watched from rooftops as the Empire's control crumbled. Some were afraid. Others stood in silence because deep down, they felt it too. Change had come, and it had a human face. Cade led the monsters through the broken gates of the tower. He moved with calm steps, not rage. Every soldier who aimed a weapon at him lowered it after seeing the beasts behind him. No army could stop an idea when its time had come. And this idea was older than any law, freedom inside the throne chamber. The High Masters waited. They had sealed. The doors called for backup, begged for help from other cities, but nothing came. Their systems had failed. Because the monsters had never truly belonged to them, they were only borrowed. And now they had returned to the one they chose. The door broke. Open Cade entered with fire in his eyes. Behind him, the monsters stood like statues. The masters trembled. "You," one said. "You destroyed the order." Cade shook his head. "No," he said. "You destroyed it the moment you forgot their names. You used fear to rule. I used memory." To rise, the masters begged for mercy. Cade didn't kill them. He turned away and said to the beasts, "Let the people decide what comes next. Not monsters, not kings, voices." Zora stepped beside him. She looked around the chamber. Once full of pride and gold, now filled with silence and truth. "What now?" she asked. Cade looked out the tall windows where smoke and starlight mixed in the sky. "We rebuild," he said. And so the city changed. Walls came down. Cages were broken forever. Monsters walked the streets in peace, side by side with those who once feared them, and at the center of it all was one man, one voice, one fire that burned through history. They didn't call him king. They called him something stronger. The heart voice. The one who didn't fight with weapons, but with memory, with truth, with something written not in stone, but in blood. The city above was quiet now. No more alarms, no more screams. The people stood in peace. Monsters walked beside them. The empire had fallen, but something deeper was still waiting. Something older, something buried far below. Zura stood with Cade. At the edge of the great pit, it was hidden deep in the forest, covered for centuries. Protected by old technology and forgotten codes, the Gorak had led them here without a word. It stood beside Cade now, silent and strong. Zora looked down the long, black tunnel. "What is this place?" she asked. The Gorak finally spoke, its voice slow and deep, where it all began. They stepped into the tunnel. Lights on the walls began to glow as they walked. The air was warm. The ground shook slightly with each step of the beasts behind them. Zura held a torch, though the light around them grew brighter the deeper they went. Cade walked with steady steps. The glowing mark on his hand pulsed stronger now. It led him forward, like it remembered the path better than he did. After an hour, they reached a massive door made of stone and light. Symbols from the prime tongue were carved into it. Zora touched one gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Cade stepped forward. He raised his marked hand. The door responded instantly. It opened with a low, deep sound like thunder in slow motion. Inside was a large, circular chamber. In the center stood the throne. Not made of gold, not made of power, but carved from living crystal, wrapped in metal veins. It floated just above the floor. Glowing softly, Cade stepped closer. The monsters behind him all knelt, heads bowed. Even the Gorak bent low without a sound. Zura stood still, breath caught in her throat. "Cade," she whispered, "this is not just a seat. It's alive." Cade placed his hand on the side of the throne. The room reacted at once. Lights danced across the walls. A voice echoed from every direction. "Welcome, heart voice. Connection confirmed. Memory unlocked." Suddenly, Cade's mind filled with images, flashes of the past. He saw great cities floating in the sky. He saw humans and monsters standing together as equals. He saw a war fire in the stars. He saw betrayal, and finally, silence. His knees dropped to the floor. Zura rushed to him. "Cade?" He looked up at her, eyes wide with knowledge he didn't ask for. "They wiped it all," he said. "The empires. The languages, the names. They buried us." The throne began to glow brighter. A hologram of a tall woman appeared above it. She looked human, but her eyes were silver. "If you see this," she said, "then the fire still lives. You are the last of the line. You carry the code of kings, not to rule, but to remind. Remind the galaxy of what we were and what we must become again." Zura looked at the image, amazed. This was history no one had ever seen. Truth hidden for 1,000 years. The woman's voice faded, but the throne remained lit. Cade slowly stood again. He looked around at the beasts, still bowing. "No more cages," he said. "No more commands. You are free." The Gorak rose. "We were always free." It said, "We only waited for the fire to return." Cade turned to Zura. "You were right," he said. "This is more than a rebellion. It's a return." She nodded, her voice quiet. The galaxy must hear this. They spent the next 2 days inside the chamber. The throne shared more than memories. It had data, ancient files, maps, locations of other hidden places across the stars, tombs of knowledge, sealed gates, sleeping protectors. The old empire had hidden them all before falling, waiting for the heart voice to return. When Cade finally walked out of the tunnel, he was changed, not by power, but by truth. He didn't feel stronger. He felt older, as if something ancient now walked inside him. The monsters followed him out into the light. The wind touched their faces. The forest was calm. But the stars above had already begun to shift. In the city, the people gathered again. Zura stood on the tower balcony and raised her voice. "We found the truth," she said, "buried far below. This human," she pointed to Cade, is not just a survivor. He is the voice of the past and the guide to our future. The people didn't cheer like before. They stood in silence, not out of fear, but respect. They listened, and in that silence, something greater than war was born. Unity. Later that night, Cade stood alone at the edge of the city. He looked up at the stars. He could feel something watching. Something. Coming not from this planet, but far beyond, he whispered. I know you're out there. And I'm not afraid. From deep space. A signal blinked once, then again, then 5 times in a row. A pattern, not from the monsters, not from Earth, but from the darkness that ended the old empire. They had seen the throne activate. They knew the heart voice had returned, and now they were coming back. The sky above the city was not the same anymore. Strange lights blinked in the stars. Old systems activated by the throne had sent out a signal. A signal the old enemy could hear, and now they were coming. Cade stood at the edge of the forest, his eyes locked on the sky. He could feel it, a cold pressure in the air, like something heavy was falling from space. Zura walked up beside him, holding a glowing device. It's confirmed, she said. Ships are on their way. They're not from the Empire. Cade didn't blink. They're from before it, he said. The ones who destroyed the first. Human Empire, back in the city, the monsters were preparing. They were not afraid. They remembered the war. And they remembered how they failed to stop it the first time. But this time was different. This time, the heart voice had returned. The enemy ships broke through the clouds like dark arrows, long, black, and silent. They didn't broadcast messages. They didn't ask for surrender. They only sent one word across the signal waves. Sura read the message and froze. They still want to wipe out all memory, she said. Cade looked at her. Then we must become something they can't erase. The beasts gathered at the edge of the city, every kind, large and small, Gorak, Bracker. Winged guardians and silent crawlers, they stood around Cade like stone. Zura stepped forward and spoke loudly. This city is not just ours, she said, it is theirs too. They were used, hurt, broken, but today they choose to protect us. A massive blast shook the ground. The first enemy ship landed. Just outside the forest, machines poured out tall, black. With red lights and cold weapons, they marched forward without fear, without sound. But then, though monsters charged, the battle was fast and brutal. Claws clashed with metal. Fangs bit through machines, but the enemy kept coming. Their numbers were endless, and they had no soul. They were created only to destroy. Cade ran through the middle of the battlefield. He shouted the prime tongue not to command, but to remind, to awaken the strength inside the monsters each time he spoke. One more beast stood taller, fought harder, protected more. Zura stayed in the tower, guiding forces. She used the ancient throne's data to find weak points. In the enemy lines, suddenly, a message appeared on her screen. Heart voice detected. Priority target. Eliminate. She shouted through the comms. They're hunting Cade. Cade reached the second enemy ship. It was pulsing with energy, ready to release something worse. A weapon from the Silence War, one that had erased whole planets. He placed his hand. On the ship's surface, the mark on his palm burned bright. The machine paused for just a moment, then exploded outward in a wave of energy. Cade flew back. His vision blurred. The Gorak caught him before he hit the ground. Cade, it growled. Stay awake. Cade's chest rose slowly. I saw a memory, he whispered. Zura reached them, falling to her knees. What did you see? She asked. Cade looked at her, eyes full of fire. They don't fear monsters, he said. They fear memory. They fear truth. He stood, weak but alive. The sky was still dark. More ships were coming. Too many. Zura looked around, panic rising. "We can't stop them all," she said. Cade turned toward the throne chamber deep below the city. "Yes, we can," he said, "but not with weapons." With the voice back inside the chamber, Cade sat on the throne again. This time, the crystal surface changed. It glowed brighter than before. It reached across space, across time, the room filled with light and sound. A voice echoed, prime tongue engaged, broadcasting memory signal. A wave of energy burst into the sky, across the planet, across nearby systems, even across enemy ships, and something strange happened. The machines stopped moving. They froze in place, one by one. Their red lights turned blue, in silence. They dropped their weapons. The wave had shared Cade's memories. His words, his pain, his hope. They felt it all. I know we could not erase what they now understood. The enemy ships slowly rose from the ground and turned away, vanishing back into space. The monsters stood still, breathing hard, watching in silence. The war was over, not by destruction, but by truth. Zura walked up to Cade once more. He was tired, but smiling. "You stopped them," she said. He shook his head. "No," he said. "We reminded them." Later, the city began to rebuild. The monsters helped clear the damage. Children played in the streets beside creatures once feared. And the story of the heart voice spread from world to world, not as legend, but as memory. Cade did not become king. He did not wear a crown. He walked the land, listened to the people, learned their stories, because that was the true power of the prime tongue. It was not a command, it was a connection. And in the stars, other voices began to rise. Old thrones awoke. Old truths came forward again. All because one human, a man who once had no past, chose to remember.